Welcome to a special Nomad Capitalist presentation. My name is Nina Spasova and I'm here with the founder of Nomad Capitalist, Andrew Henderson. This month marks the 2-year anniversary of Andrew giving up on his US citizenship and leaving United States for good. Andrew, nice to be with you.
It's nice to see you on this side of the camera.
Thank you. Before we get started, tell us why this interview is important to you.
I think there are a lot of misconceptions about this process from people in the audience, from people in the general public. I think there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of assumptions in general about me and others who take this path. And so what I really wanted to do is not only to clarify that, what I also wanted to do was address what I think nobody's doing, which is addressing the honesty that this is a difficult process. It's one that even if you think you're ready for it, it requires a lot of thought. It's an emotional process. There are things you need to prepare for, in your life. I've had numerous people, call us at Nomad Capitalist and say, "Hey, I just renounced. Now what do I do? You've done this. I mean, maybe you can tell me what's next." And I really wanted to take what I think is a misunderstood and sometimes even vilified process and try and bring a sense of humanity to it that I think is really missing.
I see. And it's been 2 years.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I feel the same, really. I mean, to me, it's kind of like I remember my aunt would call me, and I turned 10 years old, and she would call me on my birthday and say, "How does it feel to be 10?" It's like, I don't know, 9, 10, I don't know what's the difference. I feel in a sense liberated in a couple ways that I wanted to talk about. And I know we've got a lot of questions from folks who are in the audience and wanted to answer those. It's liberating in the sense that I always try and play within the lines when that's required. I think that following rules is important. I'm not someone who just shirks the rules. I like to, as we say, go where you're treated best. I like to find the rules that are the best. But I don't want to be over in this box over here and doing things wrong. And so I think that there's been so much pressure that's been let off of not only not being part of a culture that I never really identified with, but I've been out of the United States for a long time. Before doing this, it wasn't like I just woke up one day and left the U.S. and just went and renounced. So I feel liberated, but I also just feel very much the same. And I think that's maybe what I would tell people is, you're still the same person. You still have the same wants, the same desires, the same dreams, the same needs. I mean, you're not changing your personality by doing this. And so, yeah, it's really a lot of the same. But I think a certain stress of, knowing that these were the rules and knowing that I no longer have to comply with them. By the way, nothing to do with tax, by the way. I'm just, a guy who lives overseas, who was an American, ran a business, and now, just doesn't have all the stress of making sure there's so many things you have to do, and the stress from an identity perspective. So better, but really the same.
People must ask you this all the time. Why did you do this?
Why did I renounce? My reasons are probably interesting enough different from a lot of people who come to Nomad Capitalist, right? I mean, people think, Nomad Capitalist, we do tax, we do immigration. They think, oh, it's just money, that's all it is. I had thought about doing this for a long time. I remember walking around my neighborhood in the U.S. many years ago as a much angrier person, and I was talking to my father and said, I just want to get some passport and renounce. I do not like it here. I don't want the identity. And then going overseas and just seeing there's a difficulty. I remember, one time, I don't know, a number of years ago, I briefly dated someone from Iran. I remember, we were talking to an attorney. We were doing some compliance for our business, and I'm like, is that even allowed? Am I allowed to speak to anyone from Iran? He's like, and for me, as a guy who likes to kind of, who wants to be compliant. I mean, I don't want to be compliant, but I do comply because I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's what successful people do. You try and change the definition of what compliant is, and that's what I did. I just felt it really didn't serve me anymore. And I think that as humanity, we hold on to things that don't serve us because that's just the way we do things. And 6 months before I did it, I was in Vanuatu, met some guys who had renounced decades ago, and they said, you have the worst situation. You're a U.S. citizen and don't live in the U.S. And there's all kinds of obligations, and it's just very stressful. And I said, no. I said, actually, I think the worst thing is you're a U.S. citizen and you do live in the U.S. For me, that was the worst thing. And so I realized, that was the value of it, was to go back, to live there, to work there. That's why most people have it. That's why most people hold it dear, because that's where they live. It's where they want to live. It's where their families are. It's where their job is. And that's not me. And, I just said, let's just clear the deck. Let's just, it's a spring cleaning of sorts. That which doesn't serve you, the sweater that doesn't fit anymore, you give it away. You give it to Goodwill. That's what I wanted to do.
And one of the things you discuss behind scenes is that not everyone should do this.
Yeah.
Correct?
Not everyone should. Yeah. People come to us at Nomad Capitalist. We have people who come. And by the way, we run a firm. We talk about tax. We talk about immigration. If we ran a boutique consultancy for people who didn't like living in the United States, it wouldn't make nearly as much money. I mean, so I am a business guy, and I talk about things that I think I can help other people with. Some people come to us, and their entire goal is, hey, I'm planning a big IPO, and I want to save some money on tax. Other people come, and I had a gentleman about a year and a half ago. He said, I'm tired of supporting the wars. I don't want to have a passport and to be paying tax to a country where my money and my identity is going to support killing people. I talked about that in the video after I did renounce, and I said, it's very frustrating for me to have that identity. On top of everything else, it's very frustrating for me to go places and to be American, and in some places that's not welcome. And I felt weird because it's I don't identify with a lot of the things that people don't like about Americans. I felt like those things weren't me. And so it was weird. But I think, if your thing is, if you're the guy who says, I don't want to support the wars, I almost try to talk people out of that. Because I think it's a very sobering decision. It's a very permanent decision. And so if you're acting out of some kind of anger or frustration, I've been there. I know what it's like. I think anger and frustration come from not having options. What I've seen is people who we've helped who they say, I'm going to renounce, I hate this place, it's the worst. I said, okay, hold on. Let's get a second passport first and then see how you feel. And then they start traveling on the second passport. And then, so for some people, the reasons are just angry. And if that's you, then I would say, take a step back and look at what are the other options to go where you're treated best. I'm not saying to do it or don't do it. I don't talk people into doing anything. I don't tell people you have to have a second passport. If that doesn't serve what you're trying to accomplish, I'm not here to convince anyone of anything. And so I guess having been that kind of frustrated guy, I would say that's not the place, whether it's renunciation or any other decision in life, that's not the place you want to be when you're making big, important decisions.
How did it feel to leave the United States?
To leave the U.S.? Well, here's the thing that I have empathy for when people come to us, and this is one of the things that they may be considering. But by the way, let me just say this. I'm here, and part of the reason I want to do this is to put a name and a face. I'm happy to be the guy who says, here's what I've done, and I'm sure it won't be sympathetic to some folks. I'm sure some folks will say, this guy's terrible, he's a traitor, he's a nasty part, we don't approve of it. That's fine. I'm here to talk to the people who I think really need to hear the human side of this, because all they have is one side. All they have is vilification. All they have is confusion. All they have is the bean counter side of this and not the human side. To your question and to that point, I had been gone. I I spent much of the early 2010s traveling. I was outside of the U.S. more than I was at home. Those were the early days of me researching and studying this stuff. You know, towards the end of the early 2010s, I left for good. I came back to host one conference and to sell my house. And other than that, I was basically been gone. You know, so when I went to Renounce, and they may have asked me, you know, when was the last time in the U.S., I'd come back for 6 days in 2017. And it was really, it was nice actually. But by the end of the 6 days, it's like, all right, I've had enough. I've had enough now. And so my point is, for people who are considering this, or people who are thinking about this, I think I had the benefit of a number of years of already being physically gone and realizing that there are other places in the world and realizing how those other places work. And I continually learn about how to adapt in these other places and the challenges and the benefits and all that. But I think just leaving the United States and renouncing tomorrow is difficult. Now, sometimes things worth doing are difficult. But you know, this is why I think having second passports early, rather than rushing to get one and then running at the door, is a good thing. Because I think I had the advantage of being able to say, I'm not losing much. You know, I've already been gone for a long time. And to that point, I guess, when I first left the United States in 2012, 2013, for good, I gave myself that escape hatch that if you don't like it, you can come back. And I never came back.
And can we talk about the role the political climate played?
Yeah. This is a big one for me. You know, as a kid, I grew up. I was, you know, getting kind of I got angrier, I guess, in my early and mid 20s. But as a kid, I was this really kind of precocious libertarian guy, and less taxes, and you know, and I was never patriotic. I thought, this is dumb. Like I never understood patriotism. I never, like, what is this all about? You know, it's like, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, right, in the United States, and I don't follow sports, but I think the Cleveland Browns football team has won like 3 games in the last 4 years or something. I mean, it's really dreadful. And I ask myself, all these people that I know who for 35 years have been supporting the Cleveland Browns, for what? They're terrible. I never felt this patriotism. Like, you're from here, therefore, like, whatever this place does, everything that happens, it's fantastic. I never felt that. I changed when 9/11 happened. I changed, and I got into the flag waving thing for a while. But it wasn't me. You know, it's not really me. Obviously, it was a very, very sad time in U.S. history. We don't have to debate all the different aspects of that. But you know, eventually, I just came back to, I don't really like what the country does. I don't like the value. I mean, I'm not saying I hate every person from the country. I'm not saying I hate everything about the country. I've actually seen a lot of things about the country that I respect now that I have the clearer focus of being gone. But I was in South Africa when Trump got elected. And I really didn't know how to feel about it. Honestly, if I had voted, I probably would have made a self-serving vote for Hillary. Not because I think she would be a good president by any means, but because I figured, like, she's the status quo, and she wouldn't have bothered people like me too much. It still would have been, there would have been annoyances, but it wouldn't have been like, you know, I mean, she just would have kept all the globalism stuff in force. And for someone like me who was just out of the country, wouldn't have been any worse. When Trump got elected, you know, the libertarian in me who's like, you show it to those elitist, you know, snobs. I'm like, oh, great, fantastic. Part of me also realized I'm probably have to make a change because I'm not America first. I mean, I think the United States, I mean, they have a pretty good position in the world. It's not like, you know, I mean, this thing, they're being laughed at by everybody. I don't really know about that. But, I mean, there's a few things, I guess, Trump has a point on. But I'm not America first. It's not my thing. Like, I'm go where you're treated best. And I realized, I mean, I started to really see the country as, like, the psycho girlfriend. Like, like she's talking, like she's shouting, she's throwing a frying pan across the kitchen, and like who knows when she'll lash out next, kind of thing. Like I just gotta you just gotta step back and keep your distance. And yeah, I as much as I appreciate the kind of anti-establishment nature of Trump. This whole thing where this kind of return to isolationism. I guess it's good if you're a factory worker. You know what? Listen, nobody blames factory workers for voting in the interest of factory workers. But yet, I'm not supposed to want politicians who represent my best interests. And ultimately, I just realized, not only are both parties pretty much the same, but with this America First, it was just really, I knew there'd be problems for people like me.
Was there a turning point in your life?
Where I switched, where I realized this was more a direction. Yeah, I remember turning 33, not right before I renounced, and I think what was really influential for me in removing some personal friendships and people from my life, in business and in personal life, who were, I think, not a fit, who were difficult, who took advantage, I brought in some new people who were really supportive and loving, and I think really feeling, for the first time in an adult life of just working hard around the clock. Here's really some love and support. And I soon after met who's the now Mrs. H, and I think that having kind of been traveling around for a while on my own. Without as much love and support, and then deciding, no, I wanted the love and support. I wanted caring people in my life. I wanted more caring people. I had some, but more. I think that was really influential. That was about I turned 33 about 2 months before. 2 months before I did this. And I think that was, I don't know if it was a turning point, but it was a very influential moment where I think it was much easier knowing that I had people who weren't Americans, and some who were, but people who, I could travel around the world and I could know that they, really cared about me and that I wasn't on my own. I think that's important.
And you have said that tax didn't play a role in your decision. Can you tell us about that?
Well, it's an interesting side benefit. I was legally, here's the thing, people, it's tax. I and many others, for a long time were very legally, paying a little or nothing. And by the way, I'd be happy to pay a little. I don't think it's fair that the only country, or one of the only countries on earth, that makes you, phone home when you're a citizen, even if you're someone like me, for 4 or 5 years, had barely set foot in the soil. It's not like I'm using the roads or sending my kids to the schools. I think it's unfair, but okay, you're a successful person, you change the box you're playing in. I think the bigger issue is just, I felt that the culture, and the political culture, was going towards, you're not our guy. There's no one in Congress looking out for U.S. expats. If you live overseas, listen, you can live overseas and pay a lot less tax than you do living in the United States. There's, people think, I have to renounce my citizenship to save on tax. No, you don't. Maybe it makes it a little easier. Maybe it makes it a little better. It really depends on the situation. Listen, by the way, I could have moved to Puerto Rico and paid next to no tax. Okay? But again, I don't want to live in Puerto Rico. I didn't want to live in the United States. And I just really felt that the bigger issue was a person like me just wouldn't really be welcome. So not wanting to live there, I look at the political climate around the world. I look at the increasing nationalism in countries like the United States and others. And I said, you know what, my nationality, my profile needs to reflect that. I need to have nationalities. I need to be citizen of countries that are more open. Now, the U.S. is a relatively open place for foreigners to come, but if you're a citizen, I really felt it was getting bad. Now, just not having to fill out tax forms every year, great fringe benefit, absolutely. And I can tell you, I mean, when you're filling out those forms, I mean, I talk about how many bank accounts I have. I remember there's one bank I have where you lose your debit card, they give you an account number. I mean, it was like a headache every year filling out that F bar every year. But again, I complied because I think it's just the thing that if you're successful, you do because you just, so it's a nice fringe. I can tell you, it is less stressful to not have to be doing that now and to know that I can just go and open a bank account and I don't have to be like, oh, like what day did I open it and what's going on? I can do business. But to me, that's not tax. That's not like I refuse to pay. Listen, I would have paid something if they just said, hey, it's a single-digit percentage and just send us the money and like it's one form. Cool. It's not really about the money. It's just about how it's just like there's a war on people who don't want to live in the country, and I think that under Trump and under the increasing nationalism in the country, it's only going to get worse. And I think if you have someone after Trump, if you have some kind of socialist, communist, whatever kind of person, I can see that one of these Democrats running could come in one day and say, you know what, you're just paying full boat, and you're paying Social Security on your whole income, and I mean that would really be unfair. I think they might start taking your money. I don't know, but I just felt psycho girlfriend. Who knows what's coming next? Like they're going to make life difficult. Step out.
What are your thoughts on the fact that a lot of people out there are trying to address the issue of the so-called tax dodging?
I understand the frustration out there in a sense where, wages in countries like the United States are stagnant. People are frustrated. People are increasingly desperate. What I say, the issue is not people dodging tax. It's a pejorative term. It's designed to get the 98% of people who, are looking for a job or wish they had a better job. I mean, that number, those people. It's designed to get them fired up. It's a nice line for politicians to use. The reality is, when I was born, 35 years ago, where I live now in Malaysia, in the city center of Kuala Lumpur, was a village, basically. It was a kampong. And now it is a bustling center of global development that's been fueled by, as Steve Bannon said, as one of Trump's former advisors said, how jobs left the United States and they created a middle class in Asia. And what I always find intriguing about that is like, as if it's a bad thing that Asia gets to have a middle class. The interesting thing for so long was that only a few Western countries got to have all the wealth and everybody else was toiling in poverty. And now people are angry about it. And so they want to point to the issue and say, oh, it's tax dodging. Whenever there's an economic crisis, remember, the Great Recession 10, 11, 12 years ago, people were pointing fingers in every which direction. Why? Because they were scared. I get that. The world is changing. Like any other time in human history, people have to keep up. And so I think it's disingenuous that some people jump in the bandwagon, including some of these people who work for organizations where they themselves pay zero income tax to work for these organizations in Brussels and things like that, where they just pontificate all day and we get more done in our company in a day than they accomplish in a year. But I guess more importantly, I was watching an interview, I was watching a Q&A with Bill Gates recently, where someone asked him, why don't you pay enough tax? He said, first of all, I paid $6 billion in tax. How much have you paid? He didn't say that part, but that's my question. How much have you paid? I mean, like, when is it enough? The guy pays $6 billion in tax, employs a gazillion people that also pay tax, created so much wealth. It's like, you're the problem. No. You over there who are content working at your little job, you're the problem. Why don't you step up? Why don't you create something great? Why don't you add to the economy rather than just taking? But that's not popular. But what Bill Gates said, which I agree with, is listen, change the laws. Go ahead and change the laws. The laws have actually changed to where in the last, my lifetime, 35 years, nobody's hiding money in Switzerland anymore. I mean, I guess they are, but like we don't live in that world because we say, here's how to do it legally, and you comply, And so I think that the rules, and again, this comes back to America First. I mean, I think that the rules have really increasingly made it much more difficult. I don't speak to what Microsoft or Apple or those companies are doing. That's not the world I live in. I live in the world of individual entrepreneurs, investors, successful people who just want to be left alone. And I don't, the interesting thing is how many people, I was one of them, how many people live in the United States or any country and complain about the high taxes? Every conservative voice in the United States complains taxes are too high and they should be cut in half. Are they considered traitors and terrorists and all the nasty things? Listen, I wanted to live overseas, and once I lived overseas, I said, hey, maybe there's like a tax break I can get because I'm not using the services here anymore. And I took advantage of that very legally. But to say that renouncing citizenship equates to tax dodging is totally, I think, irrelevant. In the same way that nobody tells the British guy who moves to Dubai that he's a traitor. In fact, he's welcomed back with open arms. So I think there's just a lot of arguments from very frustrated people that aren't really fair.
And you mentioned you never felt at home in the United States. What do you mean?
Well, I guess the earliest example, I decided to be an entrepreneur when I was 12 or 13 years old. I sold stuff door to door. I had lemonade stands. I created a magazine and sold that, at 8, 9, 10 years old. I was always interested in business, and I decided I wanted to be in business when I was about 12. Unlike now, it wasn't cool back then. I mean, people were not very, it wasn't a cool thing to do to be an entrepreneur as a kid. I liked watching, people like Bill Gates when I was in 7th and 8th grade, and this kind of made me a geek, and it kind of made me a target. And so, a lot of people get bullied, a lot of people have, problems, but, it was kind of the first realization where, maybe I don't belong here. Because when I've traveled the world, I found that somehow there's just been a much more natural fit in other places. Particularly as when I got older, when I became an adult and I ran a business, so many things felt just unnatural to me in the United States. I remember, my friends would call me. I didn't drink until I was in my mid-20s, but my friends would call me out to join them at a bar on a Friday night, and I would show up, from work, be wearing a shirt with French cuffs and cufflinks, and girls would in their little whiny voices make fun of me about you're wearing cufflinks, that's right, yeah. And it's interestingly enough for me, when I went to other countries, people are oh, that's pretty nice cufflinks. Just normal people, normal life. I remember going to Norway in 2008. There's a presidential election coming up. I had the most exciting conversations with people about the American election in Norway that I could never have with someone in the United States. I would walk around my neighborhood in the United States, and people would shout at me for being a loser because I didn't have a car. It's I have a car. I'm just walking, Or I'd wear a scarf and they'd say "What are you, gay?" People on the street. And so you say, well, Andrew, you're gonna give up your citizenship for that? No, I left the country because it just wasn't a natural fit. It wasn't a place where I felt anyone really understood. Yeah, you know what? You can wear a scarf. I mean, it seems dumb, but you can wear a scarf. You don't have to be gay to wear a scarf. You wear a nice suit. It's watch out for that guy, And I just felt what do I want this for? And if it were oh, that's just how everybody is, then okay, cool, I'll go back. But somehow everywhere else, people were just gelled better. And so I guess eventually I just asked myself, why keep this citizenship of a country I have no great fond memories of? I mean, some, but a lot of not fond memories. Why keep this? Why be part of this? Why have all the... Why?
And did your grandma try to talk you out of it?
Well, like I said, I don't... I think it's hard for people. I mean, how many people renounce in the United States in a year? I mean, it's, there's the one number that's official that's not really the number, but it's still thousands. It's not a lot of people. I mean, you've got 320 million people. Thousands of people are doing it. I mean, it's not like the average person. I mean, this is why we've, this is something we specialize in, right? Is understanding how some of this international stuff works. Most people don't understand it. I don't know that my grandmother entirely understood it. But I think the wisdom of my grandmother, she's a very wise person, and I think part of the wisdom is, hey, you should do what's right for you, and I think that's been a great blessing in contrast to what I think a lot of people face, which is people trying to live vicariously through their family members.
So you talk to your family and friends, but can you actually walk me through the logistic steps of the process?
Right. So, I mean, for me, the big first logistic step was what I said, which was, you have to make sure you're prepared. You don't want to be one of the people who comes to me saying, I just renounced. Or we had a couple people who say, I've got an appointment for next Wednesday, like, um, I had some help. I had some of our team members helping me out. And basically, I mean, you make an appointment, you call the embassy of choice, and you say, hey, Mr. Henderson wants to come in, and here's what it's going to do. And I think you generally got to go online and schedule an appointment like any other American citizen, like you're getting your passport replaced or whatever. But then you call them because, I mean, again, it's like they've got a checkbox form coming in to renounce my citizenship. I mean, it's not a very common thing at most embassies. But you make the appointment, you go in, and you just kind of, why do you want to do it? You explain it. And I basically said in a very condensed version of what I'm telling you. One thing that is made clear is, if you owe the IRS, renouncing doesn't cancel your tax debt, right? I mean, they can still come after you, and they have ways to do that. If you're absconding from the law in some way, I mean, there, some haters said that like, oh, he's escaping a string of, whatever, legal issues or something. You can still be sued. People get sued in the U.S. We have clients who are from the U.K., from Australia, who do business in the U.S. They can get sued as likely as any U.S. citizen. If you're a criminal, they don't stop looking. I hope I can make it to the embassy before they catch me for murdering someone. I mean, come on. So they walk you through that. I think there's still a selective service requirement. I don't know how that works, but so they walk you through that. Then you leave and you come in for a second appointment. I was very lucky because the people were really professional. I could come on here and I could, have this, bad boy image of, tearing them. It was very professional, actually. It was very understanding. It was very accommodating. Not everyone has that experience. I was lucky too, and I'm grateful for that. And I think it was a nice kind of reassurance. But then you go in for the second appointment and you do the actual procedure where you take the oath and you raise your right hand. And here's what I can tell you. And if you've ever broken up with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, like driving over to their house to sit on the couch and have that talk, it's like you've got that's such a weird feeling, And you go over and you sit on the couch and you have that talk and it's tough. And, sometimes you cry together even and it's tough. Then you get in the car and you go home and you realize it's tough, but it was the right thing to do. And so for me, walking out of the main building into, I guess a lot of embassies have like this yard between like the kind of the guard shack at the front, where you got to leave all your phones and your computers and your pens and everything. And walking out, I mean, it kind of felt like walking out of, in a sense, it almost, I don't want to dramatize it or be nasty about it, but it almost felt like walking out of prison in a sense. Or, so I kind of bring it back to the kind of the psycho girlfriend thing. It's like, imagine like you walk out of, or the psycho boyfriend, okay, we can be fair. It's like you walk into their house, oh, I'm free as a bird. It's over, right? And, but when you're in that moment, it's emotional. It's like sitting on that couch. It's emotional. No matter how much you prepare, I think if you're a normal person, you're gonna have a little shake in your voice. You're gonna have a little, it's gonna be tough because it is a permanent thing, and because no matter how much people like me talk about being citizens of the world, we are still instilled from day one to cling to our identities as people from one patch of the soil over the other, and I think that's at a very deep level something that we all have to struggle with and fight, and that's there. But I think having a support group is very important, and knowing that you have people who aren't American who can support you and who are there for you. I think it's helpful.
Do you think who you are as a nomad capitalist has any impact of the process?
Well, I mean, certainly I'm a more visible person, and I've talked about it. And again, what I've learned being in business for my entire adult life is you're gonna have haters. You're gonna have people who don't believe you. You're gonna have people who don't understand you. More importantly, if you're a person, I mean, think about it, if you're a successful business person, not many people do that. If you successfully live outside of the place where you were born, not many people do that. Like, it's pretty rarefied air. Most people won't understand the decision just to even live outside of the country. I mean, I talk to people who are in Australia, their families are like shaking their boots that they might, their son or daughter might go and invest in real estate in New Zealand instead. Like, I mean, this is like, people don't understand this kind of stuff by and large. I think it's becoming better, certainly, is, more flights, more opportunities, people are, it's more a global world. But on top of all that rarefied air, I mean, here I am saying, let's talk about it, right? I have people who come to us and they say, hey, I renounced. Sometimes for tax, sometimes for other reasons, whatever. And, they don't talk about it. Listen, this is because I so focus on the human side of this, not really the financial side. I mean, the financial side is a big thing for some people, but for me, it's the human side. It's a lifetime of the human side. And I found that the way to help people with this stuff is to come out and be like, let's talk about the human and emotional side of it. Does that make it different because I'm out speaking about it? Is that distasteful to some folks? I don't know. And you know what? That's okay. Everything I do is distasteful to somebody. I mean, being successful in business is distasteful to someone who doesn't like capitalism. Living overseas is distasteful to someone who's a flag-waving patriot. So yeah, maybe the process is different. Surely I will get more slack from somebody or from some people. But I think it's important to share the message and to help people who are struggling, because I know I struggled. The entire journey for me as a Nomad Capitalist was, I wish there was Nomad Capitalist when I was starting this stuff. Whether it's opening the first bank account, buying the first property, getting the first, second passport, doing this, like, I feel it's a bit of a pioneering thing, and I want to make it less for people who feel that they need to do this, but want someone's support. And maybe that means that I catch more heat. I don't know.
Do you still view yourself as American?
I'd like to say no. And again, I think for me that part of the process of doing this was the identity that didn't work. I think the beauty of it was it went from being angry and hating the country to just saying, you know what, it's not for me. The minute that I was done, it's like, oh, all those problems, all those things I don't agree with, like, that's someone else's. And listen, I don't agree with a lot of the politics. I mean, obviously the U.S. has a lot of influence around the world. I don't agree with all of that. A lot of people don't agree with all of that. I mean, you go all over Europe and, but I don't feel ownership of it anymore. I think that's what I wanted to accomplish. And so, do I feel American? No. You're from Macedonia.
Yes.
And we still call it Macedonia here for all you Greeks who have a problem with that. Like, there's probably a siesta coming up you can take. We'll probably get some comments on that. But if you moved to the United States and you spent 5 years or something, you got a green card, like, you could become an American. To me, I mean, the interesting thing about the new world is anyone can become or unbecome. It's not like Macedonia or Serbia or wherever else where it's like you prick yourself and you bleed Serbian, and so I mean look at my wife, look at Mrs. H, who's from Russia, and she's ethnically part Russian, also ethnically part Armenian, and in Russia it's like oh no, you're Armenian. Like, you can't get a job at the FSB, you can't get a lot of political, like, you can't do a lot of stuff because that part of you that's Armenian dominates. If you're not 100% Russian, you're not one of them. It's such a foreign concept to me because she's like, I'll always be Armenian, I'm not Russian. And, for me in the new world, if you're a citizen, you're American. If you're not, you're not. Right? I mean, to me, that's the thing. That's how it works.
Can you really escape your identity, though?
Yeah, I mean, like people have said, like, well, you grew up in it, and there's something to that. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, when I talked, and this will be very controversial, but I mean, I talked about kind of the dating world in the United States. I mean, I know some, super nice women who are married to some of my friends, or just, female friends of mine. They're super nice. But there's a certain thing, like when you sit in the soup of a culture, you can't help but absorb, part of the elements. I mean, there's just a culture that you just absorb through osmosis almost, which is what makes, for me, the relational aspects of being in the United States very difficult, because I don't share a lot of those aspects. But yeah, I grew up in the United States. It shaped who I was. But you know what? Do you know who shaped who I was? My parents shaped who I was. My family experiences shaped who I was. I come from a WASPy, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant kind of upbringing. Winter is coming, work harder, your word is your bond. What I would say is, if anything, I would say either I'm an Ohioan, because I think I do identify with the kind of values in Midwest U.S. I think those values are there with me that kind of are more specific than American, which is very much a catch-all. I would also say, perhaps I'm from the Anglosphere. Certainly, there's things that Anglo countries do that other countries don't. I mean, there's a certain work ethic. There's a certain mindset. I mean, every time I meet people from the Anglo world, I'm exactly on time and they're early, right? Every time I meet anyone anywhere else in the world, like I'm on time and they're late. So there's some cultural elements that you can't escape. But when I met those guys in Vanuatu, the one gentleman's 75 years old. He renounced at 35 years old. I mean, he's still American because 40 years ago he had lived there for a while. It's an interesting question, and I don't know there's a firm answer. But Eduardo Saverin, by the way, who was one of the co-founders of Facebook, born in Brazil, right? He renounced big firestorm. He's cheating the country that of his birth. It's like he wasn't even born here. Good political points, again, like good political points. Chuck Schumer, we know Chuck Schumer, you want to grab everyone's wealth, like that's cool. And again, it's not my business anymore if Chuck Schumer wants to grab people's wealth, so I don't really comment on that anymore. I just say, not my circus anymore.
So you think you can escape your identity?
I don't think that identities are tied to a passport. Right. I mean, am I St. Lucian now? It's hard to be concrete with this, right? Listen, there's some aspects of, generations living in a certain culture that's what they raise you to do. That's how they raise you to act. That's what they raise you to be. I'm me. I think if in any aspect of your life, if you're like, I'm so-and-so's husband, I'm so-and-so's wife, I'm so-and-so's son, or, I'm this job. Like, if your entire identity is locked into something that you don't control, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. And how do you find viable friendships when everyone you live with are on a different mentality?
Well, I mean, the great thing, I guess, about, the United States is, there are so many people, and there are, millions of expats who live overseas, and those are actually the best people. From the United States. Those are the ones that you actually really want to get to know because they share your values. It wasn't, the same way that, if you like hunting and fishing and whatever else, you live in a place where people hunt and fish, and that's what they do. It's not like, I'm from Tajikistan or something. I'm looking for the three people, who I can find. You can be friends with Americans, but I think that one thing that living outside of the country, and I don't know that renunciation so much affects this, but, because you can be an expat and have the citizenship, but, living outside of the country, you realize, yes, cultures are different. That's one thing I've learned. I think, growing up in the United States, one cultural value is, we're all the same. No, we're not. No, we're not. Some people are harder working. Some people are more timely. Some people are more, relaxed. Cultures are different. But you realize that every culture also has good people. And I have friends from all over the world now, and so I think that it's a question where if you're out there living in the soup that is the world rather than that is a nationalistic one, it just works itself out.
You seem to be missing the gene where you feel you owe your birthplace. Is that true?
Yeah, it's a question I guess we get. I was talking to a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago. Here's my my weakness is I don't know, or it takes me a while at least to find my strengths. I'm like, wait, like everyone doesn't do that? Like, really? And I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he lives in Chicago, and we were talking about all the different things in Chicago and the places his father goes and he goes and now his kids go, and it became kind of a nostalgic thing. And he said, what your superpower is you don't have this gene where you have to like pine away for your home. I don't think that you owe. I don't think anyone is owed anything. I don't think I'm owed anything. I don't think that any place or any entity or any organization is owed something for life. I think you have to earn it. It's what we talk about in our company. If you deliver value, you get more money. If you don't deliver value, you don't get money, and people go somewhere else. I'm a laissez-faire, real world, business person. That's how I think. That's the lens through which I view the world. I don't know why, being born somewhere. Listen, I went to school. I went to a lot of public school. My parents paid a lot of property taxes that paid for that public school. I don't understand this thing where like you have to spend the rest of your life. And for me, it's interesting. We were talking about, the team. Some of the team members spending some time here in Mexico recently, and I said, as amazing as Mexico is, as amazing the food is, the people are great, the way like everything's great. I said, you take people from Serbia, from Macedonia, from Ukraine, from wherever, and you bring them to Mexico. Eventually, they would be like, I want to go home. I don't have that. I don't have that.
Are you angry because the people, the politics, the culture made you think that way?
Make me think.
To give up on your U.S. citizenship?
Yeah. I don't think anger is productive. I've been there. I'll tell you, a lot of the reason I've been there is because I surrounded myself with people who were problematic, who didn't, match my values. I think if you want to be happy in life, or at least at peace, which is probably a better metric, you have to get rid of things that don't serve you. If you have someone working in your company and you're always getting fired up about them and like and every day they do, you wake up, what are they going to do next? And it just frustrates you, and they annoy you. They show up at the office, they're wearing like flip-flops or something. It's like, it's not a fit. And I think that the anger comes from hanging on to those things. The anger comes from not knowing what to do. Listen, I spent a lot of time following politics in the United States. In fact, even after I renounced, it kind of took me a little while to say, what am I doing here? What am I watching this for? What am I watching Joe Scarborough for, talking about whatever? I think you have to push the anger out by realizing what are the things that are causing the anger, causing the frustration. You've got to remove those things. For me, I used to travel to 30 countries in a year, and every time I would go somewhere, I would be kind of like sheepish, like, okay, Mr. German, like, please don't, please don't judge me, and that's maybe silly, but that's how I felt. I didn't, and so I think the anger comes from staying.
Some people say you look sad. Are you sad about it?
No, because I think that life goes on. I'm a happily married person. I'm a person who is building up my infrastructure. One of the things that I've really been excited about recently is getting away from the 30 countries a year and building up different bases. And part of that, has been about building more roots in different places. I don't think that I would ever want to live in one place. People say, oh, it's an interesting tax strategy to be traveling around the world, and it can be. I literally do not have the patience to live in one place, whether it's the United States or like almost any other place. There's places that I love, but I like to bounce around. There was some sadness at different times in the past from spending time. I mean, I spent a month in Bangkok once. People ask me why I don't like Bangkok. I'm not saying other people can't like Bangkok. I personally felt a great sadness being there. Just the energy for me was off. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking the opportunity of having fewer restrictions, and I'm investing in myself. I'm investing in my lifestyle infrastructure, and I think between having a new family and having more friends and kind of cementing myself in different places, not in one place, but in different places, I think I'm less sad than ever. What I guess I am is I'm pensive. People see me sometimes, they always say, I think I'm a very pensive person. I spend a lot of time reflecting and trying to build awareness and self-awareness on this stuff, which I think it's the great thing that's overlooked in this field, Dina, is everyone's talking about the numbers. Everyone's talking about procedures. You call a lawyer, he doesn't know like what it's like to do this and to renounce and to give the passport back and get, they don't know. I think being pensive and being reflective is important.
Do you think it's unfair having to renounce?
Well, again, no one has to do anything. Life is unfair. It was interesting. We had a team. We had a smaller and more tightly wound team back when I had people who were friends of mine working with me. And we would travel around together, and they would make fun of me because like, oh, you need an e-visa for Turkey, like the Germans, we don't need an e-visa, and does it make it unfair that being a U.S. citizen has disadvantages, or that if you want to leave the U.S. because it's such a polarizing place I think the answer is get better friends. The answer is don't surround yourself with jerks. I don't know that what's fair or what's not fair is relevant. I think that as in business, we make our own fortune, and if you're going to dwell on what's fair or unfair, yeah, the U.S. is a very polarizing place, and it wasn't a place that was for me, and I felt uncomfortable in a way that maybe someone from Canada wouldn't feel as uncomfortable about. It is what it is. Yeah, it would have been nice to be born 100 miles further north in Canada. Would have been nice if my parents would have moved when I was 12 to New Zealand, as was discussed, and that could have been the identity. But life is what it is.
One reader asked, I can't believe you paid that amount to announce to someone you no longer want to be a member of their club. Why not just toss the membership and not show up?
I guess he's talking about the fee, the renunciation fee, the $2,350 fee, which has gone from $0 to, was it $450 and now $2,350. I think that's unfair, by the way. I think that the U.S. government takes advantage. Not so much that it affected me, but there are people who are expats in places like Canada where they do want to renounce for tax reasons because they're getting screwed. I mean, they're paying a fortune in Canada, and then the tax systems don't match up, so they've got to. I mean, it's just a mess, and they can't even afford $2,000. So if the question is, why don't you just stay a U.S. citizen and just like not follow the rules? I call that the success tax. By the way, I've known people who do that. And here's the interesting thing, right? I'm the nasty guy. I'm the terrible I'm the traitor. I'm all that. Hold on a second. I get zero benefits. I don't go there. I don't want the I get nothing, right? Not that I ever thought that I would get consular protection if something happened, but you call them, my wallet got stolen. Good luck, call the police, right? You don't really get that many benefits. But, which is worse? Me saying, you know what, it's not for me. You're not going to get anything from me, and I'm not going to get anything from you. Let's just part ways. Which is worse, that or the guy who says, ha ha ha, the IRS is so disorganized, they'll never find me. I'll just stay and not pay. And I'll go and I'll come. Andrew's a sucker. None of the people who ever said that to me were multimillionaires. And working with multimillionaires and being successful myself, when you reach a certain level, you just say, this is the success tax. Again, Am I a guy who plays by the rules in a metaphorical sense? No, I think most rules are dumb. Whether it's at the St. Regis Hotel with their dumb little rules, or whether it's, this nature of which patch of soil were you born on. But at a certain point you say, am I going to live my life as a criminal? Is that what I want to do with my life, Nina? Listen, I'm going to opt out, or I'm going to play by the rules. And again, for a long time I did play by the rules. I made sure the forms are filed. I made sure I was in full compliance. By the way, it's not like I've opened the floodgates now and I'm suddenly taking on every Sudanese client, who I couldn't accept as, as an American. But it comes down to the success tax. I don't, want to live my life constantly wondering when the knock on the door is coming. I don't agree with all the rules, but I'm not a guy who likes to stay and fight. I don't believe in stay and fight. We gotta change our country. You can change it. I'll just go where I'm treated best.
Do you regret it?
I don't do regret. What's interesting is I've done, I've made a couple, I wouldn't say life-altering, but important decisions throughout my life as an adult that I look back now sometimes and I say, I probably would have done that differently now. We all have, right? We've all done things where we would have handled it a bit differently. And you know what? In some of those cases, hey, you can't go back, right? So there's been maybe things you do when you're 21 and you set yourself up to where, later there's a consequence and you can't change it. I don't think that I've never been regretful of those things. I just say, here's where I'm at today. And maybe it speaks to the kind of entrepreneur that I am, where you have to make the best decision for you at the time. They talk about the third Apple founder who sold out his shares for hundreds of dollars, some very low amount to Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, and he'd be a multi-billionaire today had he not done that. He said, listen, I had some serious concerns about these particular things at the time. I was very worried. At the time that I made the decision, it was a good risk analysis. Hindsight's always 20/20, but I think if you regret, you're not going to be very successful.
How difficult would it be to get the U.S. citizenship back?
Well, from a procedural standpoint, and I've talked to I have a network of a lot of lawyers who specialize in this kind of stuff. I don't know that anyone's ever said I want my U.S. citizenship back, because my point about being American earlier was, does anyone? I guess a lot of people do. They view the citizenship, they view the identity as important. But I think for a lot of us, it's, would you want to live there again? To me, that's what it is. I don't need the ability to work in the United States for a high-paying job. That's not what I need. That's not my particular need. I know a lot of people want to go to the United States because they think it's the land of milk and honey, and that's fine. But procedurally, it's the same as anybody else. Would they treat me any differently? I don't know. I don't think they would treat most people differently. My spouse is not a U.S. citizen. My children won't be U.S. citizens. My parents are, but I think I'm past the age of needing their support. I guess if I wanted to go and make an investment or do whatever else, I could possibly go back in and eventually get back citizenship. I think you have to look at decisions that you make in your life as, what if you couldn't take it back? And it's emotional, but if you saw through the emotion, I think most people would say, they don't need it.
How has the process changed you as a person?
I don't know that it has, other than the point of not my circus, right? Other than allowing me to step out and say, when I'm having conversations with people, oh, your politicians, oh, your government. It's not mine. And so what that's done is it's brought me a great sense of calm. Because again, the anger is, you're in the relationship where every day you're fighting and you're miserable. And then you end the relationship and then it's like, you kind of look back with a bit of fondness. I don't know how fond I am, but I certainly have a bit more respect. I know that, we talk. You never would have heard me 5 years ago giving the U.S. credit for anything. Actually, I gave them credit for free tap water in most restaurants. That was, and I still think that's very important. But listen, there is a method to. There are things in the United States that I do respect. Doesn't mean I want to be part of it. Obviously, they've been very successful. People there are very successful. I think, when you live in the United States, when I lived in the United States, oh, lazy Americans. On a global scale, Americans are not really lazy. So, I think what it's changed in me is a greater ability to be like, now that I'm not sitting in that toxic relationship, in my mind at least, I can be, it's breaking up with the girl and then saying, you know what, it didn't work for us, but like, she was good at that. And for me, I think that's been a very positive kind of calming thing.
Have you noticed animosity between you and old friends who are still in the States?
I have a group of close friends who understand, to as much of an extent as they can. I have friends who, they tell me, one day I'm going to join you. I'm like, okay, yeah, yeah. I know that they won't, and I respect that. Listen, I get, like, people think, I'm here to have as many people renounce, burn the place down. It's not my goal. People need to make the best decision for them. And so I think that, most of my friends were always older than I was. I'm getting to that point in life where now I have friends who are also younger, who are also really, successful and on the ball people. But I've got a lot of friends who are older, and I think they have a maturity of, you did what's right for you, we're doing what's right for us, we understand the best we can. I don't think there's any animosity. I guess I have had relationships with animosity because people wanted to be, they just felt the need to be jerks about them not needing an e-visa, or, there was one friend of mine who, when I renounced, it's like, what are you going to do without visa-free travel to Equatorial Guinea? Like, I still have Equatorial Guinea. And it's like, okay, like, these are, so, no, there's no animosity. And I guess the cool part is, having friends who are willing to unite a wedding, get married in Montenegro, friends who are willing to, get on a plane and come over and be with you. To me, that's really meaningful. And it's also the value of having fewer friendships. Just having fewer good friendships. I think if you're the kind of person who thinks in the way that we do here at Nomad Capitalist, colors outside the lines, you're probably not cut out to have 50 different friends.
What does your family think?
I don't entirely know. My family, we are waspy. It's less emotive. I know that there were one or two people who were, kind of frustrated during the process. They said, I guess like anyone in a family, even if they know you've thought through it and you've really done a lot of soul searching, they haven't done it for you, and so it's hard for them to say yes, you're ready. Again, my family, we meet in places around the world. I'm fortunate to have, parents who are in good health, and they can do that, and they're, successful enough to be able to do that. If they weren't, I guess I could fly them in myself. I will be honest. I didn't, come from some huge, Italian or Latin family, whatever these big families where, 62 people get together for Sunday dinner every week. We didn't have that. Which made it easier. That the pool of people to talk to was smaller.
And what does your wife think?
Well, she supports me, and that's really the great thing about her is she's just a very supportive and loving person. I think here's the interesting perspective, right? Someone who And she's been to the United States, and she spent, I think, a summer there once. But someone who's not from the United States, can have a more agnostic view about it. The biggest, issues, not issues, but the times when I had friends or colleagues or business associates, lawyers, whatever, who were like, Andrew, you're doing that. It was really about their culture viewed U.S. citizenship as the be-all, end-all. Like that was the golden ticket to be from Georgia or to be from from Cambodia, or to be from, Colombia, and be able to have like that, like American passport is the golden ticket, and you're just saying, like, no thanks. I don't know that anyone of my friends was insulted by that. They're just like, are you serious? My wife, coming from Russia, not being a traditional Russian, I mean, I think we shared that. I mean, she never really identified so much with Russia the same way I never so much identified with the U.S. It was a good fit. But, even that said, she never saw the United States as the golden ticket either. And so therefore she said, well, it sounds like you're calmer, it sounds like you're happier, it sounds like not much in your life has changed, other than you just don't have this piece of paper. And she says, if that's, what's better for you, then you should do it. And you shouldn't listen to people. You shouldn't listen to naysayers. She's been a great voice for me to help me, drown out the naysayers.
How do you manage seeing your family now?
Yeah, as I said, I mean, I fly them in, or they'll fly in. Again, my wife, who comes from that kind of, that kind of Southern European, Caucasian, cultural background of Georgian/Armenian, she calls her parents and her grandmother a lot more often. I call my grandma, I call my grandparents, I call my grandmother. My grandmother she said she'd never get a computer, by the way. Like for as long as I was interested in computers, for 25 years now, she said, I'll never get any computer. She finally got a smartphone, and now she's on Facebook. And so we'll chat. Sometimes it's Mrs. H and I. Sometimes it's just my grandmother and I. And she sends all the little Snoopy stickers, and and we have a nice chat. But if I called my grandmother every other day, I think she'd get sick of me. It's just who we are, and I think it's hard for a lot of other cultures to understand that. But we do meet up in different places, and it's nice. And we can handle. Even when I lived in the United States, we didn't see each other every day. So I guess my point to someone considering this, whether it's just being an expat or actually expatriating, is, you can manage. There's a way to manage it. And potentially my family has said, hey, if when my family grows, maybe we want to find a place near you. I mean, people can come to Mexico, they can come to Montenegro, they can come to Malaysia. I mean, they can come most places in the world, especially if you're an American, you can easily go most places.
Does it feel weird that your children would not be American?
No. I know expats who live in places where their children have a lot of problems. I mean, I have a friend who his children can't get a simple savings account where they live because they don't take U.S. citizens. And the child wanted to follow in his footsteps, the father's footsteps, and renounce, and the embassy wouldn't let them because they're 11 years old. We don't let 11-year-olds make these big permanent decisions. But yet, to the bank, an 11-year-old is an 11-year-old. Here's the issue, I think, right? I mean, this is the bubble that is kind of being American, and that's where most people live. The thing that, the first generation, I think, stresses out about at times, or stresses out about, they worry about, is having the opportunity to go on a whim. If my children are born in other environments, they'll adapt to those other environments. I mean, in the same way that I don't think, most folks from you're from, they might want to live in the United States again for a job, but, really, economics aside, they'd like to be in Macedonia. That's what they know. It's what they embrace. And so I think once the first generation passes, it really doesn't become much of an issue.
You've been outspoken about having multiple passports and the need for a passport portfolio.
Yeah.
Why is that? And is that a natural extension of renouncing?
Well, the passport portfolio, I mean, number one thing I've mentioned to someone, to a government worker before, why do you have these passports, is it's what I geek out on. I don't buy into this concept that citizenship is some like sacrosanct, thing, like it can't be sold, like we have to. I don't buy into that personally, and so for me, it is just fun. I mean, at a certain point, diversification. I mean, it's nice to be diversified. I'm a big believer in diversification, and so the answer to your question from kind of a former U.S. citizen standpoint is, the U.S. passport as a travel document is a very good travel document. And so by having several passports now, I'm able to replicate the travel by combining those passports to pretty much everywhere except for, 4 or 5, key countries. By the way, almost none of which I was visiting as a U.S. citizen anyway. I mean, I think we have a lot of Canadian and Australian clients. I spent, a mere matter of days in my U.S. expat time with a U.S. passport going to those countries. Just nothing wrong with them. They just didn't personally interest me. And so, I think having a passport portfolio helps to replicate the travel abilities. I also think, if you're thinking, I don't want to be a U.S. citizen, obviously there's geopolitical stuff with the U.S. passport. There's a lot of different, risks with being a citizen of any one country. And so I still like having the flexibility of being a citizen of different countries. And as I mentioned, at this point, I feel like I'm pretty well, practically covered. I think I have plenty of diversification. But number one, it's fun. It's fun for me. There's certain countries where you go and you practically make money becoming a citizen. You make an investment, and it's like a profitable process. I mean, so if I were making an investment in that country anyway, it's a good investment. Like, why not take the free passport? What I'm really doing now is looking at a passport portfolio as growing a passport, growing mine in terms of places that I would like to live in the future. I haven't really put that much focus into it. Up until now, I'd like to have several passports of places where, I know that I'm a citizen and I'm always welcome. And, for me, I guess that kind of craving, as much as I don't buy into the idea of nationality, there is kind of a craving for identity. I see people around, they're proudly this or proudly that. I'd like to find an identity that I really enjoy, not because it was just given to me, but because I adopt it intentionally. There's a part of that interests me as well, if we're being honest.
What problems have you encountered since you renounced?
Few, if any. I think the biggest thing that U.S. citizens think will be an issue, and it really kind of puts them off in a sense, it's maybe a stumbling block for them in this process, is the visa process. Having a passport portfolio, I need fewer visas. I know a number of people who have just renounced being, Dominican or, one of these citizenship by investments. They buy it, they renounce, they're done. They need a few more visas. The visa process is not difficult at all. In case, I'm kind of a visa policy wonk. I geek out on it. It's not so bad to go to an embassy because for most countries in the world, you go to an embassy, you take a bank statement, stamp, boom, boom, done. Far easier than the paperwork of, keeping spreadsheets of, which bank account had which and all that. So I really haven't had any problems. I guess maybe the confusion that's existed is that sometimes you'll go to a country and, in all your other passports, it says, born in USA, and they'll look at it. Or some countries, they'll scan your passport and all of your other passports come up. Like some countries, oh, you have 3 passports. And sometimes they'll say, oh, where's your U.S. passport? To which my response is, what do you care? This passport also works. But then they'll say, but you have I see it's valid. One guy said, I can see it's still valid. I said, well, if valid means being on the shredder at the State Department of Washington is still valid, then by all means it's still valid. I think for those people we mentioned in some of these emerging countries, the idea of canceling, as they would call it, your U.S. citizenship is hold me, Jesus. Who would do that, right? But I think that's been the biggest challenge, quote unquote, is having to stand in a 5-minute line occasionally, or having to explain to someone, why I don't have this.
How has life changed for the better?
For all the reasons discussed, right? I just think now it's life. I think that's the big lesson I would tell somebody. It's an emotional process, I understand. Here's how I look at it, right? I think a lot of people look at the process of renunciation as you're here, and it's once you do it, it's all downhill from there. Your life is impossible. It's difficult. You have all these restrictions. I look at it as I felt restricted as a U.S. citizen. It was difficult for a moment. It was frustrating. It was a whole process. It was in December of 2017 or whatever. Like I had other things I could have been doing, but I put this as a priority because I felt it was the time. For me, it was down for a brief period, and then it was back up, and now it's like I'm back to normal. Again, listen, for me, having a lot of things to comply with was stressful. I mean, because I take it seriously. I take, hey, you want to know every single bank account I have? I think that's dumb, but you know what? Again, as I said, success tax, I'm taking it seriously. And there was a time when it's like, bankers in other countries wouldn't understand that requirement, and they'd be like, oh, we just opened 7 new accounts for you or something. And then having to keep track of that was stress, because I wanted to be very compliant. And again, that's not a matter of paying; it's an issue of paperwork. I don't know if that life is better. I just think that it's better, I guess, in the regards of I feel more free. But I just think life is life, and it shouldn't be an issue where it's like there was, it's not like before and after. It's not like BC and AD. It's not that. It's just you have a little blip, and then you're back to your normal life, just as a different nationality.
Do you feel that other countries treat you differently now without the U.S. passport?
This is a concern, and it's a concern. I've had some friends who are, who've kind of said, oh, like I can wave my U.S. passport around. I don't. What year do we live in? This is not. We're not in the Cold War anymore. Here's the secret. Do you want to know the secret about how most countries operate? They don't care. You're this. You're that. Imagine you're a border guard. You're doing the immigration. People come through. There's a line. People are waiting. Everyone's coming through. You see all kinds of different passports. Are you sitting there? Oh, look at this guy. He's not. No. Obviously, again, there's a few countries I can't go to. There's also a few countries that I can go to now that I couldn't go to before. No, I don't think anyone. I think that there are 3 types of countries in the world. There are a small group of countries that are judgmental, namely countries in the Anglo world where you go and they ask you a lot of questions. And I do kind of think that maybe while they don't really act on it, that, I remember I went to one place and it's like he was asking me a series of questions like, okay, you're this, you're that. Oh, you're born in the U.S., but you're not American. It's like, I wonder, he's like, he probably has some kind of judgmental profile in his head of like, I know what kind of guy this is. And that's fine, whatever. Just stamp the thing. There's judgmental countries, not many of those. There's countries that don't care, and then occasionally there's the person who's confused, or the country that's confused. There's certain countries where more people are confused. But the vast majority of the world, they don't care. They really don't. Newsflash, the world does not revolve around the United States. It is a country in the world. It's a wealthy country. It's a country with a good passport. I haven't seen anything, and nobody I know who's also renounced has seen any difference.
A lot of people in the West think you should be punished for being a traitor.
Is that a question? I remember looking at I think it was Roger Ver, the Bitcoin guy who I think he made a video or he put something, maybe it was on Twitter, because he talked about not being able to go back to the U.S. I'm paraphrasing. I think I'm getting it correct, but there were people commenting. I remember like, good, like you shouldn't be allowed to come back. We don't need people like you. Yeah, again, that's the frustration. People take it so personally. I don't. You know what I've learned? Especially in business, but in life too, you're not going to understand everybody. If we spend all of our time trying to figure out people that we're not in alignment with, what a way to waste a life. I'll let them waste their life being angry about other people's decisions. Look, there are people who are leaving because they don't want to pay or because they believe the terms are, the conditions are hostile, being a U.S. citizen, people who live overseas. Listen, I have a different view. If you're a country in this day and age, you have to create value. We are not living in the Cold War era anymore when it's a handful of countries that people want to live in and the rest of the world is terrible. Or at least that's how the West perceives it. But we have so many countries have come up and offered opportunities, better places to live, better social opportunities, better weather. I grew up in Ohio. My parents were like, we want to move to Arizona. We're tired of this terrible weather, right? Are you a traitor to Ohio? No, it wasn't offering them the value they needed. We live in a competitive era now, and a lot of people don't like it because they're being left behind. I guess the same way a lot of people who, made buggy whips didn't like the car coming out. We live in a country where now jurisdictions, whether it's states in the U.S., whether it's countries, they have to compete. So punish away if you want. I don't really understand that, and I think it's very short-sighted. But that's what you have to understand if you're living in this space of nomad capitalist, is again, it's very rarefied air. Most people are not going to understand or approve.
You've talked about Tier B passports as being the wave of the future. One of our readers asked, does it help being white if you're a Tier B citizen?
So, yeah, the Tier B passport, in the scheme of Tier A, B, and C, I've kind of come up with this phrase to say Tier A is you can go to countries like the United States. Obviously, if you have a U.S. passport, Canadian, British, whatever, that's Tier A. You can pretty much go wherever you want, including all the developed world generally. Tier B would mean you can go to Europe and a lot of other places, but not to the U.S., Canada, for example. And then Tier C would be you can't go to any of that, like a Russian passport or something. And so obviously, some Tier B passports are better than others. St. Lucians, for example, we get London, or the UK, we get Ireland. Russians, even with Tier C, they get a large swath of the world, just not the West. And so, what's interesting when you leave the U.S. bubble, or the Western bubble, I guess, more appropriately, is you have to acknowledge the fact that there are some countries that are kind of racist policies. I've talked about this, where a lot of countries figured out, where are you in the pecking order in relation to them? And I remember going somewhere in the Middle East once, and I was watching this poor guy in front of me get harangued by the border guard, and I'm like, oh, calm down. When people get in my face, I get a little testy sometimes, and so I got ready and I went up and the guy's like, "Hey man, where are you coming from?" I'm like, "Oh, I flew in from Tbilisi." He's like, "Cool. Like, how's the weather in Tbilisi?" And I'm like, "Wait a second. Like that guy in front of me is like Pakistani and I'm white. Yeah, okay, I see how it goes." They don't really like the Pakistanis. Like that's just their thing. And is it fair? No. I'm sure someone. Andrew said that. I'm not saying it. I'm saying here's the reality. Okay, when you live in the normal world, this is the way the normal world works, like it or not. I do think being, tall and white and blonde and blue-eyed, I guess probably helps in some cases. That said, I know we have some folks in the audience who are, of color, and I don't know that, again, if we look at most countries in the world as not caring, I don't think it's a huge issue. I know we've had people who in the audience who are Indians, and they say, even if they're Indian American, by the way, they go places, and it's like, oh, I don't know if it's the passport. I think it's more that there are certain places where you're not going to escape it. Perhaps if you're an American, listen. Do you want to know the reason why? Part of the reason why Israelis don't have visa-free travel to the U.S. It's partially because the U.S. says you treat Arab Americans differently than you treat everyone else, and we're not going to tolerate that. You're either letting all of Americans in, or you're not letting them in. And so Americans can go to Israel visa-free, but the United States claims, I don't know if it's the case or not, but they claim that Israel is less friendly to folks who are Arab. So I don't think it's the passport that's the issue. Just the same way as if I were to get if I had an African passport or something, I think I'd probably have less scrutiny because I look this way than someone who was born there. Like it or not, I'm not saying it's fair, but I'm saying I think it's what it is.
Do you think that it's easier to be an expat now than a generation ago?
Well, again, what I talk about is, in 1984, the best places to be born, I believe the United States was number one. West Germany was on the list. Now the United States, I believe, is barely in the top 20. Has the United States gotten worse? Perhaps. mean, but what you've seen is the emergence of countries around the world, such as South Korea, Singapore has certainly solidified its position. Countries that have decided they wanted to win and are now very formidable places. I mean, I don't know that necessarily when my parents were born, they would have wanted to move to Korea. Now you can move to Korea, and while you might have a language barrier at times, it's certainly a very developed and very good infrastructure place. So I think that two things drive the ability to be an expat in terms of living outside of the United States. That's it. You have far more places that have been built up and developed and that are livable. I also think that to that point, the paradigm has changed. I once said a couple of years ago when Trump was running for office, I said, if you're going to build a wall, please make sure I'm on the Mexican side, because I'd rather live in Mexico, quite frankly. You have a lot of the good things about the United States, the diversity, the food, the culture, the hustle and bustle, at least in Mexico City, without some of the annoying things. And so, I think if people open up their minds to the idea that, Mexico, for example, is not so bad, in fact, maybe in my mind it's even a little better, that, it makes it more feasible. I don't think, if you ask my grandmother is fascinated with the Anglo world. She's fascinated with England. She minored in French. She's fascinated with France. I tell her, we're going to Cambodia. She knows there was a war there. She knows history very well, but she would never think, hey, that's a place I would live or invest or spend my time. So I think that's what's changed. From a citizenship point of view, yeah, I think if you look back to the early 2000s, I think every passport was far inferior to what it is now. There's been a huge wave of visa-free travel opening up over the last 10 to 15 years. Again, take the Russian passport, from about 50 countries visa-free to almost 120 now. Because we're more globally connected, a lot of these countries are doing deals. I have passports where every year they'll get 2, 3, 4 new visa-free countries. We're constantly adding countries, including those that a U.S. passport doesn't have, because countries want to open up investment. They want to open up people coming and cultural exchange. That's important. And again, countries realize it's a competitive world. So, the idea of, Armenia and Paraguay getting together and saying, hey, we hope that we can send a few people in between and maybe do some business because we don't want to be uncompetitive. Not only do I see great progression in Tier B passports, but every passport has improved. And so I think we live in a world where visa-free travel is being more and more a thing. Even countries like Belarus or Kazakhstan that were part of the Soviet era are now saying, yeah, let's let everybody come. And then they're making it easier and more easier. And then they're going to have an e-visa. And I just think that the direction of the world means that you no longer need that one excellent passport anymore. It's pretty easy to get around with what I call the Tier B passport because they're constantly improving and they're actually pretty good these days.
Jason asked, isn't renouncing for low-level rich people? The 9 and 10-figure entrepreneurs don't renounce. They maximize their U.S. citizenship.
Well, yeah, certainly, you look at, Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or Jeff Bezos, or those people, and you say, yeah, they maximize it. What's always intriguing to me is, U.S. citizens are very protective of their own nationality, but yet if Jack Ma or someone else from China or someone else from many other countries, or a Russian guy, for example, wanted to renounce their citizenship, they would say, oh, that's fantastic. When in reality, Chinese citizens, from what I see, pretty much do what they want when they're overseas. And then they go back to their embassy and they're treated very well. So it's interesting that even though the restrictions on those people are probably, less, that Americans feel, but no American would bat their eyes at. Of course, that guy threw his Chinese passport in the trash. Oh, that's what he should do, Listen, people do what's right for them. Bill Gates has paid $6 billion in taxes, as we said earlier, and that's what he has claimed on a personal level. Obviously, if you have $100 billion, having paid $6 billion, and we don't know, I don't know when these figures are. I'm just repeating figures that I've seen in his speeches. But It's a lesser bite for someone like him. By the way, you've seen people like Eduardo Saverin, again from Facebook, who renounced and I guess saved hundreds of millions of dollars. You saw Tina Turner. You've seen a lot of people over the years. So you have seen a lot of successful people doing it. I also know that there have been people who have come to me. We've had some high-level people who, names you would know, who have come to me and said, I might want to renounce, but I can't because I'm a public figure and I'm selling stuff and, the masses wouldn't like it. And so if that got out, I'd see a big hit in my business. And so it's just better for them to stay and deal with everything. Yeah, listen, I don't know that Bill Gates or Warren Buffett share the same reasoning that I have. And nor do I know, nor should we surmise. I do think there's kind of this thing, but what's interesting is that the same people saying, well, you're just a poor sucker, are the same ones who are saying that those guys don't pay enough tax. The average person, who lives in the United States doesn't have all the advantages. If you're Bill Gates, paperwork is pretty easy, So people should just do what they want.
What would you say to someone who wants to follow in your footsteps?
Well, what I tell people, I think I opened with was, you have to get to a point where you're calm about it and where you realize it's the right decision for you. What I've seen sometimes is like people trying to do this retaliatory renunciation. Here's, nobody's going to miss you. There is ego around this, and I'm not saying it's ego again. I'm not saying it's ego in a bad way. But there's an ego around this thing where it's like being American is some great privilege. There's this ego around like if you renounce your U.S. citizenship, that they're going to sit around, everyone at the embassy is going to sit around and cry. You just got to do what's right for you, and you have to have your own reasons. I have a whole smorgasbord of reasons. Some other people might just have a purely financial reason, and it might be painful for them, but they're going to say, hey, you know what? It's worth it. Everyone has to have their own reasons. I don't judge. I think a lot of other people judge. I don't judge. And if you listen to everybody else, you're never going to be successful. You've got to do what's best for you. But if you think that you're getting back at someone or you're showing them, that's not how it works.
Are you ever nostalgic thinking about the U.S.?
I look back through, my business career and my life, and I talked once about how, when I was 22, 23 years old, I was, just building up my business, and I would have clients and consulting gigs and work in Southern California. I lived in Arizona, and I would drive usually overnight because I was young, and you'd get one of those, liter-and-a-half Mountain Dews that you get in the U.S. at the gas station, and you just pull an all-nighter, you'd drive, and you'd get 3 hours of sleep, and then you'd get to work. And I would talk about, driving into Los Angeles and being a radio geek and working in the broadcasting industry, tuning into KFI and listening to this booming, amazing radio station in the big city. And so I have memories like that I am occasionally nostalgic of. I had a day maybe 9 months ago or so, but Mrs. H and I were driving back in the car from kind of a little road trip, and I was listening to all these old radio station legal IDs, for Radio Korea, Los Angeles and stuff. And it's fun. What I think I'm very cognizant of is, that was interesting because I was 22 years old. If I went back now, pulling an all-nighter to Los Angeles in the car would be miserable because I just don't really like driving anymore. I can't really pull all-nighters the way I did when I was 22. And, it's interesting because you're aspiring to that. When you're 22 years old, it's like, wow, it's like, if only I remember we tried to get some of our clients into KFI one time. It was very difficult. And it's like, if only I could see the inside of KFI. And then finally we did go because we finally had a client who wanted to be on one of their sister stations, and we did a big deal. And it's like, all right, the curtain is down and it's no longer as interesting. So I think that, the older you get, nostalgia becomes more dangerous because you can't go back in time. you can't go back and recreate those memories. And to me, that's what nostalgia is. It's a series of events at a certain time in your life that you're just not going to recapture. I think being present is really what's most important. And I think you could live pretty much anywhere in the world, including the great number of places that are available to you if you just enjoy the present.
Do you think you'll ever go back?
Well, the thing about citizenship that transcends permanent residence, temporary residence, tourist visa, visa waiver, whatever, citizens have something unique that no one else has, which is the guaranteed right to get in. I mean, they can't turn you away. Even if you show up in the United States and you're a U.S. citizen, if you show up without a passport, it's going to take them a while to process you and figure out. But eventually they have to let you in. The passport is essentially a tool of convenience. So it's not entirely my decision. I would like, what Mrs. H has encouraged me to, being from her stronger family background, she'd like me to go and see my grandmother, who's been a very influential part of my life. And so she'd like me to do that. I'd like to do that, I suppose. I think what's interesting is after I renounced, I felt like, oh, now that I have this great sense of calm, I don't feel like this is my place anymore. Hey, I can go back to Miami for a week and just kind of hang out. And I think very quickly that dissipated. Like, if I wanted to do that, I would have done it when I had the opportunity to, guaranteed. I ultimately think that for me, sure, I wouldn't rule out going back. If I look at my own family, my grandmother, who's still alive, she remarried a gentleman who was from Czechoslovakia. Had a very interesting story. He was hung in effigy and could never go back, and he never got to visit his mother's grave. They had the opportunity to go on a cruise once when they were retired, and they were advised not to get off the boat in what was then Czechoslovakia because they didn't want to have any problems. And so by the time that it had opened up and he could have gone back, his health was just really poor and he had a lot of knee surgeries, he couldn't go back. I wish I would have been able to connect with him more now that I know what I know outside of the bubble than what I did when I was, a teenager. But I think that his story was very fascinating. It's an example of even if you can't go back, life goes on, and I think he had a great life, and he, had a great, new family, and I look at that as an example where I think so many people are chasing, the one thing. They get one-itis, you can't live in a world, whether you're a citizen or not, I don't think, where only one place matters. If only one place matters, then maybe this isn't for you. Maybe you just live there and just deal with it.
And what if they don't let you back?
Well, I guess it's the same story. Here's how I look at things in life: is we all make decisions and we live with the consequences of our decisions. Other people make decisions, and they have to own those decisions as well. If that's their decision, then that's on them. And I'll live with that, and I'll be okay with that because I'm a business guy who does risk analysis, and I look at best case scenario, worst case scenario, likely scenario. I think that I have to accept, as does anyone in the situation, as would you, as would anyone else. Who knows what could happen? Who knows what could happen in any country? My view is go where you're treated best. I feel I've done that. I feel I've done the best in my life to be happy. And you know what? I feel like as I've come to peace with this, and I've created a sense of calm, and I've created a greater sense of respect towards the country that I left, if they don't reciprocate respect, I guess that really says more about them than it does about me.
Andrew, thank you for being here and answering a lot of thought-provoking questions. To those of you watching, please leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you.